Jack Thornton never expected to inherit his grandfather's 10-acre ranch on the outskirts of Meadowbrook. At 35, he had built a respectable career as a civil engineer in the city, but the death of his beloved grandfather, Earl, changed everything. The property was a slice of heaven, rolling pastures, a modest but sturdy ranch house, and a barn that had weathered 5 decades of southwestern seasons. "It's all yours now, son," the family lawyer had said, handing over the deed. "Your grandfather was specific about that in his will. The last piece of undeveloped land in the area." Jack took a leave of absence from work and moved into the ranch house, determined to honor his grandfather's legacy. The property needed work, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. He spent his days mending fences, cleaning gutters, and learning about the small hobby farm operation his grandfather had maintained well into his 80s. What Jack didn't realize was that during the 5 years he'd been away, Meadowbrook had changed dramatically. The once rural community had been engulfed by suburban sprawl, with cookie-cutter subdivisions sprouting up all around his grandfather's land. The Suncrest Estates Homeowners Association, which governed the newest development adjacent to the ranch, had been eyeing Earl's property for years, waiting for the opportunity to expand their reach. As Jack walked the property line that evening, he noticed new survey stakes with orange ribbons placed just inside his fence. He frowned, pulling one from the soft earth to examine it. "Southeast Property Line" was written in neat block letters along the wooden stake. "Southeast, Suncrest Estates." Jack tossed the stake aside and continued his inspection, finding at least a dozen more markers encroaching on his grandfather's land. The next morning, Jack drove into town to visit the county assessor's office. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses, recognized him immediately. "You're Earl Thornton's grandson," she said with a warm smile. He'd come in here every January like clockwork to pay his property taxes in person. Said he didn't trust the mail with something that important. "That sounds like Grandpa," Jack laughed. "I'm actually here about the property boundaries. Someone's placed survey stakes on my land." The clerk's smile faded. "Let me pull up the records." Her fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard. "Here we are. 10 acres, properly recorded, taxes paid through the end of the year." She turned the monitor so Jack could see. "Your boundaries are exactly as they've been since 1972. Then why would Suncrest Estates be marking my property?" The clerk lowered her voice. "Between you and me, that development has been trying to expand ever since they broke ground 3 years ago. Your grandfather turned them down at least 6 times." She leaned closer. "Their president, Diane Harrington, used to work in real estate. She's got connections with the zoning board." Jack thanked her and left with certified copies of his property survey and tax records. On the drive back to the ranch, he noticed how the new housing development pressed against his property like an invading army, uniform houses with manicured lawns, each indistinguishable from the next. He pulled into his gravel driveway, appreciating the weathered authenticity of his grandfather's home compared to the plastic perfection of Suncrest Estates. The ranch represented everything the development was not: individual, unique, with a history that couldn't be manufactured. 3 weeks after Jack had settled in, he was repairing a section of fence when a silver Mercedes pulled up alongside his property. A woman in a crisp pantsuit emerged, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Diane Harrington, president of the Suncrest Estates HOA," she announced, not waiting for him to acknowledge her. "We need to discuss your property's compliance with our neighborhood standards." Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and frowned. "Ma'am, this ranch isn't part of Suncrest Estates. It's private property that's been in my family for generations." Diane's professionally whitened smile didn't waver. Actually, there seems to be some confusion. According to our records, this land was meant to be integrated into our community as shared green space once the previous owner vacated. We've already included it in our community planning. She handed him a document filled with legal jargon, pointing to a highlighted section. As you can see, this area is designated for community use. The pond on your eastern boundary is particularly valuable as a water feature for our residents. We'll need you to remove these unsightly fences by the end of the month. Jack stood dumbfounded as Diane returned to her car, calling over her shoulder. Our landscaping team will be by next week to assess the property. Welcome to Suncrest Estates. That evening, Jack pored over the documents Diane had given him, his engineering background helping him navigate the dense legal terminology. The paperwork appeared official, with letterhead from both the Suncrest Estates HOA and the County Planning Commission, but something felt off. The document referenced an agreement dated 3 years prior, a time when his grandfather had been very much alive and in possession of all his faculties. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed his grandfather's oldest friend, Vernon Mitchell, who had lived on the neighboring property until moving to Arizona the previous year. "Vernon, it's Jack Thornton. Did my grandfather ever mention anything about selling or donating part of the ranch to Suncrest Estates?" Vernon's gruff laugh came through clearly. "Hell no. Those vultures came around at least once a month with offers. Earl would run him off every time. Said he'd rather be buried on that land and see it turned into another cookie-cutter neighborhood." "That's what I thought," Jack muttered. "They're trying something, aren't they?" Vernon asked. "Earl warned me they might. That's why he left you the ranch instead of selling it. Knew you'd fight for it." After hanging up, Jack examined the document again, noting that the signature that was supposed to be his grandfather's looked nothing like the bold, distinctive scrawl he remembered. He pulled out his grandfather's will for comparison. The signatures weren't even close. The next morning, Jack drove to the county planning office. After 30 minutes of searching through files, a helpful clerk confirmed his suspicions. The planning document Diane had shown him wasn't on file with the county. "There's no record of any agreement between Earl Thornton and Suncrest Estates," the clerk explained. "The only documents we have show your grandfather denied their annexation request 3 times. Jack's anger simmered as he drove home. Diane Harrington wasn't just being pushy. She was actively trying to defraud him with forged documents. As he turned onto the gravel road leading to his property, he spotted a group of people standing by his eastern fence line. Diane was there, gesturing emphatically, while a man in chackies took notes. Jack immediately contacted his grandfather's lawyer, who confirmed what he already knew. The HOA had no legal claim to his property. The ranch predated the development by decades and had never been part of any agreement to join the association. But the HOA wasn't backing down. The following week, Jack returned from a supply run to find 3 men in Suncrest Estates uniforms on his property, measuring the area around his pond. "What do you think you're doing?" Jack demanded. "Community assessment," the lead man replied casually. "Mrs. Harrington sent us to map out the walking trail." "Get off my property now," Jack said firmly. "This is private land. You're trespassing." That evening, he received a certified letter from the HOA containing a $500 fine for obstruction of community planning efforts, and a notice that his unsightly farm equipment needed to be stored out of sight. When Jack called Diane to protest, she was unmoved. "Mr. Thornton, fighting this will only make things difficult for you. The board has unanimously voted to incorporate your property into our Green Space Initiative. Your grandfather verbally agreed to this arrangement years ago." Jack knew this was a blatant lie. His grandfather had turned down multiple offers to sell his land, including one from the developer of Suncrest Estates. The next morning, he awoke to find a group of residents having a picnic by his pond. When he confronted them, they seemed genuinely confused. The HOA newsletter said this was now community property. One woman explained, showing him a glossy flyer featuring a photo of his pond with the caption, "Suncrest Estates expands. New community nature preserve now open." Jack took photos of the trespassers and politely but firmly asked them to leave. Most apologized and departed quickly, clearly embarrassed by the misunderstanding. As they retreated, Jack noticed a brand new path had been mowed through his east pasture, leading directly from the subdivision to his pond. That afternoon he drove to the sheriff's office and filed a formal trespassing complaint, complete with photos and documentation. The deputy on duty, a weathered man named Rodriguez, sighed heavily. "We've had other complaints about this HOA," he admitted. "They're aggressive, but usually careful to stay just on the legal side of things. This, though," he examined the forged documents Jack had brought. "This crosses a line." Deputy Rodriguez promised to speak with Diane personally, but warned Jack that without catching trespassers in the act, there was limited action they could take. "I'd recommend putting up no trespassing signs immediately," the deputy suggested. "Makes prosecution easier if it comes to that." Jack spent the evening installing signs along his property line. As he hammered the last one into place near the mowed path, he noticed a group of residents watching him from the Suncrest Estates side of the fence. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to open hostility. The next day, Jack discovered all his signs had been removed and a park bench had been installed beside his pond. A concrete pad had been poured nearby with what appeared to be the foundation for a gazebo. Furious, Jack called his lawyer, who sent an emergency cease and desist letter to the HOA board. The lawyer also advised Jack to install cameras immediately to document the trespassing. When Jack checked his mailbox that afternoon, he found a thick envelope containing a lawsuit from the Suncrest Estates HOA, claiming his unauthorized agricultural activities were decreasing property values and demanding he either convert his ranch to appropriate community green space or pay $50,000 in damages. The battle lines were drawn. As Jack leaned against his fence, staring at the infiltration of suburbia onto his land, he realized this was no longer just about property rights. It was about honoring his grandfather and standing up to bullies who thought their money and influence put them above the law. After consulting with his lawyer again, Jack understood that legal action would be expensive and time-consuming. He needed an immediate solution to protect his property. That afternoon, Jack drove to the nearest agricultural supply store and purchased materials for electric fencing, the kind used to keep livestock contained without harming them. As a civil engineer, he knew exactly how to install it properly and legally. Over the next 3 days, he worked tirelessly, installing solar-powered electric fence systems around the perimeter of his property, with clear warning signs posted every 20 feet. He was careful to place the fence entirely within his property line, leaving no room for disputes. He also installed security cameras at strategic locations and placed no trespassing signs at all potential entry points. As a final touch, he released his grandfather's 2 guard geese, notoriously territorial birds named Bonnie and Clyde, from their pen to patrol the property. Jack then sent a formal letter to the HOA board, copying his lawyer, stating that he had taken measures to secure his private property and that any trespassers would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. He included copies of his deed, property survey, and documentation proving the ranch had never been part of any HOA agreement. The morning after completing the fence installation, Jack sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reviewing the county agricultural code his lawyer had sent over. The regulations were clear. Electric fencing was perfectly legal for livestock operations in rural and agricultural zones. His property, despite being surrounded by suburban development, was still zoned agricultural, a fact his grandfather had fought to maintain. Jack glanced out the window to see Diane Harrington's silver Mercedes pull up to his gate. She stepped out, designer heels sinking slightly into the gravel, and approached the new fence. She reached for the gate, then hesitated as she noticed the bright yellow warning sign. Electric fence, 8,000 volts. Livestock containment system in use. Diane pulled out her phone and began taking photos, her face twisted with indignation. Jack watched as she paced along the fence line, stopping periodically to document his security measures. When she reached the pond area, she froze, spotting the newly installed cameras mounted on tall posts. Each camera was positioned just high enough to be out of reach, but low enough to capture clear images of anyone approaching the property. Jack smiled as Bonnie and Clyde waddled into view, honking aggressively at the intruder. Diane backpedaled quickly, nearly losing her balance on the uneven ground. That afternoon, Jack received a call from Deputy Rodriguez. "Just got off the phone with Mrs. Harrington," the deputy said, amusement evident in his voice. "She's claiming you've created a dangerous and hostile environment with your security measures." "Is there a problem with my fence?" Jack asked, feigning concern. "Not at all. Agricultural electric fencing is perfectly legal in your zone, and you've posted all the required warnings. As for the cameras, you have every right to monitor your own property." "And the geese." The deputy chuckled. "Livestock is expected on a ranch, Mr. Thornton. I suggested Mrs. Harrington direct her concerns to the County Agricultural Board, which, as it happens, is headed by a man who was good friends with your grandfather." Jack spent the rest of the day reinforcing gates and checking camera angles. He set up motion-activated floodlights near the pond and barn and programmed his security system to send alerts to his phone whenever someone approached the property line. That evening, as he walked the perimeter for a final check, Jack spotted several Suncrest Estates residents gathered across the street, pointing and discussing his new security measures. He waved politely, then turned his attention to Bonnie and Clyde, who followed him like loyal dogs as he completed his rounds. The reaction was swift and furious. Diane Harrington and 2 board members arrived at his gate the very next day, accompanied by a man she introduced as their lawyer. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed, pointing at the electric fence. "This is a hazard to the community. We'll have to fine you for unauthorized modifications." "This is standard agricultural fencing on private property," Jack replied calmly. "Completely legal in this county for livestock operations. I've registered it with the Agricultural Board." "We'll see about that," Diane snapped. "The board meeting next week will address your violations. I suggest you attend if you want to avoid further penalties." As they argued, one of the board members attempted to step over a section of the fence to inspect it more closely, despite the warning signs. The man yelped as he received a shocking reminder of why the signs were there. "That's assault," the HOA lawyer declared. "That's a properly labelled, legally installed livestock fence doing its job," Jack corrected. "And you're still on my property without permission." As if on cue, Bonnie and Clyde came charging around the corner of the house, honking furiously at the intruders, who beat a hasty retreat to their vehicles. That evening, Jack received notice of $2,500 in HOA fines and a threat of legal action. Instead of worrying, he posted the entire interaction from his security cameras on the community social media group, along with copies of his property documents and an explanation of the situation. The confrontation had been captured perfectly on Jack's security cameras, including the moment when the board member had ignored multiple warning signs and attempted to climb the fence. Jack's phone had been buzzing non-stop with notifications from the neighborhood social media group where he posted the video. The reactions were mixed. Some residents expressed outrage at Jack's extreme measures, while others were clearly disturbed by the HOA's tactics. One comment in particular caught his attention. "Is this why our HOA fees increased last quarter? To fund a lawsuit against a property that isn't even part of our community. We were told the increase was for playground improvements." This comment, posted by a resident named Sarah Jenkins, sparked a heated discussion about HOA finances and transparency. Several homeowners began questioning how their dues were being spent and why the board was so fixated on acquiring Jack's land. The next morning, Jack was splitting firewood when a silver BMW pulled up to his gate. A man in his early 40s stepped out, wearing chackies and a polo shirt embroidered with Suncrest Estates HOA on the breast pocket. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Robert Chen, HOA Vice President. I was hoping we could talk." His tone was considerably more conciliatory than Diane's had been. Jack approached the fence cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "What can I do for you, Mr. Chen?" "Frankly, I'm concerned about how this situation is escalating," Robert admitted. "Your video has created quite a stir in the community. Several board members, myself included, weren't fully briefed on the details of this dispute." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You mean you weren't told that your president is trying to seize private property using forged documents?" Robert winced. "There are questions being raised about how this has been handled. I'd like to propose a compromise." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of screeching tires as Diane's Mercedes skidded to a halt behind Robert's BMW. She emerged from the car, face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing, Robert?" she demanded. "Board members are not authorized to conduct independent negotiations." "I'm trying to de-escalate a situation that's spiraling out of control," Robert replied, his composure slipping slightly. "The situation is under control," Diane hissed. "The county commissioner is meeting with us tomorrow morning to discuss zoning violations." She shot a triumphant look at Jack. "I hope you've enjoyed your little farming hobby, Mr. Thornton, because the board has filed a formal complaint about your livestock and electric fencing. We have children in our community, and your aggressive geese and dangerous fencing pose a safety risk." Jack's security cameras captured every moment of the tense three-way confrontation that followed, including Diane's unintentional admission that she had already scheduled private meetings with county officials without board approval. Jack's video went viral within the community. Many residents were shocked to learn that the HOA had falsely claimed his property was community land. Several came forward with stories of their own negative experiences with the board. 3 days later, a different HOA board member, Robert Chen, reached out to Jack privately. "I had no idea this was happening," Robert admitted. "Several of us on the board were told this was already arranged with your grandfather. Diane has been pushing this agenda for months." An emergency HOA meeting was called, where numerous residents expressed their outrage at the board's actions. It came to light that Diane had personal plans for Jack's property. Her husband's development company had been contracted to build luxury homes on the land once it was acquired. Within 2 weeks, Diane Harrington resigned from the board, along with her 2 closest allies. The new board, led by Robert Chen, issued a formal apology to Jack and publicly acknowledged that his ranch was private property with no connection to Suncrest Estates. As a gesture of goodwill, Jack allowed the community to organize supervised visits to the pond twice a month, where his grandfather had always permitted neighborhood children to fish. He established a small educational program about sustainable farming, inviting local schools to bring students for tours. The electric fence remained, though Jack installed a proper gate with a combination lock that approved visitors could use. Bonnie and Clyde became local celebrities, with children often stopping by just to see the infamous guard geese. 1 year later, Jack's ranch was thriving. He had opened a small farmer's market on Saturdays, selling produce grown on his land. The new HOA board had established clear boundaries, literally and figuratively, with the ranch, and many residents became regular customers and friends. As for Diane Harrington, rumors circulated that her husband's development company had purchased land 20 miles away, far from any existing HOAs. Jack made sure to send them a housewarming gift, a framed photo of Bonnie and Clyde with a note that read, "Fences make good neighbors." The day of the emergency HOA meeting remained vivid in Jack's memory. The community centre had been packed with residents, many standing along the walls when all the seats filled. Robert Chen had presided, calling for order as neighbours voiced their concerns. "My family pays $450 a month in HOA fees," one woman had declared. "I want to know why we're trying to steal someone's private property when our own playground equipment is falling apart." Another resident, an older man with military bearing, stood up. "I reviewed the documents Mr. Thornton posted online. If those signatures are supposed to be his grandfather's, they're forgeries. Plain and simple." The most stunning moment came when Sarah Jenkins, the resident who had first questioned the HOA finances online, presented her findings after requesting the association's financial records. Over the past year, Suncrest Estates has paid $87,000 to DH Consulting for community expansion planning, she announced. DH Consulting is registered to David Harrington, Diane's husband. The revelation of this clear conflict of interest brought the room to stunned silence, followed by calls for Diane's immediate resignation. In the weeks that followed, an independent audit revealed that Diane had been funneling HOA funds to her husband's companies for years, drastically overpaying for services and prioritizing projects that benefited their joint business interests. By spring, the ranch had become a gathering place for the community, not through hostile takeover, but through Jack's genuine desire to share his grandfather's legacy. The fishing pond was stocked for seasonal catch and release days, and local families signed up for plots in the community garden Jack established in his south field. The land that had once been the focus of conflict became a symbol of reconciliation. The new HOA board worked with Jack to create educational programs about sustainable living and small-scale agriculture, bringing in experts to teach residents about growing their own food and raising backyard chickens. On the anniversary of his grandfather's passing, Jack sat on the porch, watching children feeding Bonnie and Clyde under the supervision of their parents. The electric fence had been modified, still present as a boundary marker, but now deactivated in sections where designated pathways connected the ranch to the community. "You'd have liked this arrangement, Grandpa," Jack murmured, raising his coffee mug in a silent toast to the old man who had fought so hard to preserve this little piece of rural America against the tide of suburban expansion. As the sun set over the pasture, painting the sky in brilliant orange and purple, Jack felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had not only protected his inheritance, but had transformed it into something that honoured his grandfather's memory, while creating something new and valuable for the future.